Hi guys, my name is Blake. Welcome. It has been a long time since I have sat and filmed. I wanted to give you kind of a recent read wrap up. So I was in grad school for the first half of the year. I just graduated, thankfully, so I am done with that forever. But I did not get to read very much in my last semester of class like I thought I would have time to. So I decided that I would just do a quick little wrap up of everything I read because I didn't read very much. So these are all the books I read from January through April, and I have 7 books to talk about. 5 of these are adult fantasy, 1 of these is a YA fantasy, and 1 of these is an adult historical fiction, I think. Most of the books I read were pretty meh. This year has been not that great of a reading year for me, and I ended up giving 1 of them 2 stars, 4 of them 2.5, and I had 1 4-star read and 1 5-star read. And I'm just gonna go from the one that I liked the least to the ones that I liked the most. And the first book that I have is that historical fiction book, and I read Where the Crawdads Sing by Dehlia Owens. And in this book, we're following Kaya, who lives in the marshes of North Carolina, and we're following her life from childhood to adulthood, where she has mostly grown up by herself, and she has been forced to kind of mostly live off of the land, and we're watching as she has faced a lot of prejudice from the people in her community, but also there is a murder, and she is the first person who is blamed. I feel like this is like a really well-loved book, and this isn't my normal cup of tea, and I wanted to start by saying that because I don't really like historical fiction. I don't read historical fiction hardly ever, but this was a buddy read pick, and I was really intrigued to get into this one because I know how hyped it is, and I heard that the movie is pretty great. The girl that I buddy read with, she wanted to read this after having seen the movie and really enjoyed it. I was incredibly bored while reading this book. From start to finish, I feel like nothing much really happens. I was really excited about that murder investigation, but even that was not very interesting to me. And then the entire book felt like it was almost written to be adapted. As I was reading it, I was like, I feel like this would come across much better on screen than in a book. That being said, I do really like the descriptions of nature and the animals. I thought that those were really pretty. Normally, whenever I read a book that is so hyped, I feel like I can see where the hype is coming from. But this one was kind of surprising. I'm not sure why it has received the amount of love that it has. But again, I don't read a lot of historical fiction, so maybe that's just me. Next, I have Queen of Sorrows by Beth Durst, and this is the final book in the Queens of Rinthia trilogy. Because it is the final book in a trilogy, I'm not really sure how to talk about it very much. But essentially, we are in this world where there are these elemental spirits, and these elemental spirits are kind of in a give and take relationship with the people in this world. But they are out of control. They will eat people. And the queen of this kingdom is required to keep the balance in check between the elemental spirits and the people. And that's kind of the main setup for the first book. Actually, it's kind of the setup for everything. But in this book, I was incredibly disappointed after loving the first book. I found the second book to be okay, and this one really let me down. I loved that we got to revisit all of the old characters from previous books, and I loved the antagonist in this one. I thought we had some strong characters, especially in our main cast. The main character of book 2, Nalan, whatever her name is, she was in this book. I couldn't stand her in that book. Still couldn't stand her in this one. I feel like she had a very her entire plot was based on just one thing, and that was really frustrating. I don't think that she's a good decision maker, and reading about her was absolutely infuriating. I did like the politicking in this book as well, but beyond that, I really didn't like much of what I saw. So the elemental spirits that were such a big part in books 1 and 2 were hardly present in this one at all. And book 1 was incredibly dark and brutal, and this one was not. It almost felt like I was reading a different series or a different book, because the ending of this book actually wrapped up like really nicely with like a pretty bow, at the end, and everything was wonderful, and I was surprised because I felt like it wrapped up too nicely for this world, and the entire plot felt incredibly rushed. There were things that we brushed over. Characters made choices and decisions that didn't feel like them, and there were a lot of scenarios where people were making big decisions, and I wanted to see kind of the fallout or the consequences of some of those decisions, and we didn't really see that either. So way too rushed, way too brushed over. It almost kind of made me regret reading the trilogy. The first book on its own is like a good standalone. So in my mind, the series just ended there, basically. I know that there is a spin-off book called The Deepest Blue that takes place in this world that follows different characters in a different place. And I have heard that that one is good, so I think I am going to revisit that book later. I have Court of Miracles by Kester Grant, and this is a YA fantasy, and it's supposed to be Les Mis meets Six of Crows. I didn't really get that comparison much at all. I don't know anything about Les Mis. I've never read it. I've never seen any of the adaptations, but I do really enjoy Six of Crows, so I was excited to pick this one up for that comparison, and I love a heist story. Our main character, Nina, and she is in the Court of Thieves, or the Guild of Thieves, and her sister has been sold to the Flesh Guild, and she decides that in order to get her sister back, she is going to take this young, beautiful little girl and raise her up, and at the right time, she is going to trade her to the Flesh Guild to release her older sister. And that's kind of the main setup for this book. And this book had some really cool descriptions of the scenery and the setting. We are in France, and I really love kind of the descriptions and the grittiness of the city. And I really loved the descriptions of the different guilds. So there is a ghost guild, a flesh guild, the assassins guild, the thieves guild. I love seeing all those guilds and how they were kind of in constant conflict with one another, and how they had to kind of work together, but also while working around each other. So there were some great politics going on. But my biggest frustration actually comes with the setup of the story, because it is pitched as like a thieves story, because Nina is a thief. She's called the Black Cat. But she doesn't really do a whole lot of thieving. We get a few glimpses here and there, and this book felt incredibly formulaic, where we have some story, and then there is a problem, and Nina has to break in and steal something, but while she's breaking in, something goes wrong, and then we easily fix it, and then we go back to the story, and then we kind of start the loop all over again. And we just hit kind of the same things every time we did something, and that was a little annoying. Also, it is set up for Nina to have multiple love interests, and I wasn't feeling that either, especially when she is so motivated to get her sister back. And also, there are months and years that pass by within passages, and we're never told, and so that was kind of jarring to have those time jumps, and they were pretty frequent as well, especially in the beginning and towards the end. So I found this book to just be underwhelming, especially being pitched as it was. Up next, I have The Bard's Blade by Brian D. Anderson. And in this book, we are following our main character, Lim, who is a bard in this world that is protected by an enchanted barrier, and anyone who goes through the barrier can't make it back. But at the beginning of this book, someone crosses through the barrier and tells Lim that his destiny awaits him on the other side, and he has to vanquish this evil. And then off Lim goes to find his destiny. But before he leaves, he breaks up with his girlfriend, telling her that he is going to go find this because that is what he is supposed to do. So he goes through this barrier and his girlfriend follows after him. I was incredibly frustrated while reading this book. I spent days complaining to my sister about Lim because he is just the worst character. He makes the dumbest decisions. I feel like everything in the plot was like based on Lim's poor decision making. Like that was what was moving the plot forward. And we had all these characters who, you know, whenever you're playing a Nintendo game or a video game and you're just running around collecting information from characters, and that's what it was like. It was frustrating because I wanted someone to have some substance and I never got it. Everyone was giving Lim advice, giving him things, and the story went in a direction that I wasn't expecting it to, especially with Lim's character. And then I was kind of frustrated at the ridiculousness of some of his scenes after that. But the writing style was really good. I really liked the writing. I loved the way that the author describes things. I had several tabs in the book for quotes that I really liked. I do think that this book had a really cool setup. I don't think I've ever read another fantasy book with a bard as a main character. I know that Name of the Wind has a bard character, I think, but I haven't read that one yet because it's not finished. But I was really entertained by the idea of following a bard. I was really looking forward to that aspect. And I do think that it had a good, solid setup. And I'm just sad that I didn't like it more. Next, I have The Gunslinger by Stephen King. And this book was trippy, and I was lost throughout most of it. So I liked the beginning, and I liked the end. But everything in the middle, I was kind of like, what is going on? And I really can't even tell you the plot of the book because I don't really know it. Like, the gunslinger was chasing the man in black. That's what I can tell you. And I had so many questions while reading this book. And most of the questions either didn't get answered or they were answered at the very end. But by that point, I was so lost, I just didn't care about the answers anymore. Like, why is this man chasing the man in black? What did the man in black do? How does one become a gunslinger? Are we in our world? Or is this a different world? Is this an apocalyptic future? Are we in a regressed past? Is this a parallel world? I had a ton of questions. And then once I had finished reading it, I watched a summary video. And I was like, oh, okay. Because they hit all the highlights. And I was just kind of like, that's it. Like, I remember these things happening. I just wasn't wildly impressed with what was going on. I wasn't too terribly interested. But then I really liked the ending. And I have heard a lot of people say that this book is not the best, or that it's kind of a slow start to a much more epic and longer series, or that it's more like a prologue. I have seen people say that you should just skip this one. So I'm not exactly sure how well this book is an indicator for me liking this series. I do want to continue on and give the second book a go because, like I said, I did enjoy the end, and I've never read anything by Stephen King and completed it. I read The Long Walk and The Stand in high school, and I DNF'd both. So I am proud of myself for completing this book. And I know that he has an entire, series of books out there that are interconnected with one another. And I really want that fix of those books being interconnected because I love that in the Marvel Cinematic Universe and in Brandon Sanderson's Cosmere. So I really just want more series like that. And if this book series and Stephen King's other works are that, I am willing to give them a try. Up next, I have the first two books in the First Law trilogy by Joe Abercrombie. The Blade itself, I gave 5 stars, and Before They Were Hanged, I gave 4 stars. I was surprised at how much I loved these books. They're kind of my obsession at the moment. I didn't think I would like them at all because I don't like character-driven stories normally. I'm very particular about pacing and, low fantasy type of stories. And I had heard from basically everyone that there isn't a plot. It is mostly character-focused. Be prepared. And I was like, oh, I'm not going to like this because this was another buddy read pick from a friend, and we decided that we both had these series and we wanted to read them together. And we both ended up being completely surprised. I loved the characters in this. Every character had a very distinct voice, and I never had to check and see whose chapter I was in because I knew exactly from how they were talking and their mannerisms and what they were doing. And so that was really wonderful. I also really loved the sarcasm and the sense of humor of Joe Abercrombie. All of these characters were incredibly witty and snarky, and I just loved that kind of humor throughout the first 2 books. I especially loved Glokta. He was my favorite character. I love seeing Giselle suffer because I can't stand him. And it is really great seeing these characters with these different personalities. And nobody is likable. And ultimately, that's the reason why I decided to pick these up, or why I purchased them, was because I do love a morally gray character. And these characters are definitely just that. And I read the second book, and I was hoping that we would get a little more of a plot, because in the first book, we kind of get some hints that some things are going on in the background that we're not fully aware of yet. And so I was thinking that that would be a bigger aspect in book 2. And that didn't end up being the case. So now I'm feeling a little conflicted before going into the third book. I'm a little nervous because part of me is like, we have so much to wrap up because we have so many characters and they are in so many different places doing different things. How are all of these things connected? But also at the same time, my brain is like, actually, we don't have anything to wrap up because we have no plot. So I'm not really sure where this third book is going, but I am really excited to see, especially because I feel like there was a lot that fell through in the second book. So our characters are kind of all hitting dead ends and failing their quest, essentially, in what they're doing. So I am interested to see how all of these things are kind of interconnected and how these failures are going to contribute to the plot. I'm also really looking forward to seeing how these books connect with Abercrombie's greater world, because I know that all of his books are connected, or most of them are connected. And as I said with the Gunslinger, I really love seeing those interconnected stories. So I am really looking forward to continuing on with Abercrombie. And those are all the books that I read in January through April. Let me know if you've read any of these because I would love to hear your thoughts on them. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again with another video soon.